In the previous video, we saw the general form for the conic equation, that long equation with the a, b, c, d, e, and f in it. And that equation works out nicely for us because we can use the values of a and b to quickly identify the conic. But actually, that's about the only thing that it's really good for as far as working with the equation and the graphs and so forth. What we really want to do is get this equation into what's called standard form, because that tells us a lot more about the shape. In fact, it tells us enough to really make a decent graph of the conic, where the general form really only tells us what kind of conic it is. So we're going to have to convert general form into standard form. And in order to do that, we do something called completing the square. This is something that you probably did in Algebra 1 and Algebra 2. And the process is pretty simple, and it's common to all four shapes. We'll go through a couple of examples of just completing the square, and then in future videos we will go ahead and apply those to the individual shapes. So let's go ahead and do a couple of examples here. I'm using x as my variable here. I'm using y as my variable here. Of course, the name of the variable really doesn't matter. What's important here is that we have a quadratic, and we're going to try to complete the square here. And the reason for completing the square is because it's going to allow us to get it into a form where the numbers in the equation actually make sense in terms of the graph and so forth. You'll also notice that the coefficients of x and y are both 1 here. I should say x squared and y squared are both 1. And that's important for applying this process. Later on, when we see more complicated quadratics with numbers other than 1 out front, we'll have to take a couple of additional steps. But for right now, let's just get the basic idea taken care of. So a good thing to do first would be to just get the constant term, this guy right here, moved over to the other side. We really want to get x squared and 6x in this case together to work with. So we'll just write x squared plus 6x equals 4. So I just added 4 to both sides. Now the next step says rewrite with space and parentheses. And what I mean by that is I want to go ahead and put some parentheses around here and add a little bit of space right here. We're going to fill in a number. And we're going to have that 4 still over here. Now, which number are we going to put? Well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take this number here, the linear term of the quadratic, and we're going to divide it by 2. In this case, that gives us 3. And then we're going to take that 3 and we're going to square it, and that gives us 9. And so now what we're going to do is rewrite this x squared plus 6x, and we're going to take this number right here, this 9, and add it inside the parentheses here. Now, as you know, if we do something to one side of an equation, we have to do the exact same thing to the other side. So I'm going to have to add that 9 over here. And I'll underline both of these 9s just to emphasize that they're the same 9 as this. All three of these are the same 9. Okay. Now, the last thing we're going to do is to change this part right here, this quadratic, into what's called a perfect square. And what we mean by perfect square quadratic is that it looks like x plus or minus something squared. So if you were to write this out and FOIL it, you should get this. Well, it turns out that this number right here is the exact same number that we want to put in here. Oops. Let's try that again. That's better. We want to put that right here. So I'll go back to the highlighter here. Okay, so these two numbers are going to be the same. So doing this initial divide by 2 step is going to give us the number that ultimately goes here. So even if you've forgotten how to factor quadratics, this tells you how to do that. Okay, so we've got this now reduced down to this form, and on the right side we have 4 plus 9, which is 13. Now this is really as far as we're going to take it when we do these completing the squares for our standard form. Normally what we do with completing the square is after the factoring, we actually can solve this for x. So completing the square is actually a method for finding the value of x in a quadratic where we don't have to use the quadratic formula, for example. And the way that would work here, just to give you the example, is if we were to take the square root on both sides, we would have x plus 3 over here and the square root of 13. And then we could solve this for x by subtracting 3 on both sides. And this really is plus or minus square root of 13. And so we would have negative 3 plus square root of 13, negative 3 minus square root of 13. Again, we're not going to really worry about this for what we're doing, but that's the purpose of completing the square. It's also going to help us to get the standard form that we need. Let's try another quick example over here. We'll be using y this time. Again, doesn't matter what the variable is, but since our general form is going to have both x and y, it's good to be able to think about doing both of these. So we're going to go ahead and again move a constant over to the other side. So y squared minus 8y is equal to 9. We're going to rewrite with the space and with the parentheses. Okay. Now we're going to go ahead and get our half. So negative 8, remember the negative sign goes with the number, divided by 2 is equal to negative 4. And then we square negative 4 and we get positive 16. So notice that in either case, whether we have a negative number or a positive number to square, we're always going to get a positive number out of this. Okay, so we're going to put this all back together. Y squared minus 8y. We're going to add the 16 to both sides. Okay, and then we'll factor this, and again, we don't really have to factor it. We're going to have y minus 4. The minus 4 comes from right here. Let's do that again here, right here. So y minus 4 squared. Notice the square is on the outside because this is one of the factors. And actually there's two factors that are exactly the same. Y minus 4 times y minus 4. That would give us this. So the squared has to go on the outside here. And just to emphasize that, we'll go ahead and highlight that. On the right side, we have 9 plus 16 is 25. Okay, so here are a few sample problems that you can work with. I'll go ahead and work a couple of these. Let's start with the first one here. This one should be pretty simple, hopefully. We've got x squared plus 2x. And again, we're going to move this negative 3 to this side by adding 3 to both sides. So we get this. Let's reformat this with our space and parentheses. And then we'll go ahead and divide the middle term by 2. We get 1. We're going to square that number, and we also get 1. So we'll rewrite x squared plus 2x plus 1 equals 3 plus 1. So we've added the 1 to both sides here. And then finally, we can take this and write it as a factored term using this number right here, x plus 1 squared on the outside, and on the right side, 3 plus 1 equals 4. So that would be the answer to the first one. Let's try another one down here. Number 4, you notice that there's a number on this side that's not 0, and that really doesn't matter. We're just going to take the 5 and subtract from both sides, and we'll pretty much be in the same place as we were before. So here we go. Y squared plus 12y is equal to negative 20. So again, I've subtracted 5 from both sides. Negative 15 minus 5 gives me negative 20. Put the parentheses and a little bit of space here. And I'll go ahead and we're going to divide this by 2, which gives us 6. Square 6, we get 36. And so we will now add that to both sides. Y squared plus 12y plus 36 equals negative 20 plus 36. And now we can take this and factor, and we're going to get y plus 6 squared equals negative 20 plus 36 is 16. So I'm going to pause the video here and give you a few seconds to go ahead and stop the video and try to solve the rest of the problems, and then I'll put up the answers in a few seconds. All right, and so here are the answers to the two problems that I worked plus the rest of the problems. So hopefully you got these answers as well. And we'll continue on with a couple more videos on completing the square for the conics and graphing them.